Welcome to the Sky Notes podcast. Join us for an insightful conversation as we explore the upcoming Aries sun and why we call the Aries sun season the year's ingress. We will delve into the significance of the equinox as a time for new beginnings and discuss the analysis of planetary influences on women's issues, legislation, and partnerships. Thanks for joining us. We're really glad you're here.
Hello, my friend Lillian.
Hey, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Yeah, it's been a while since we've got to chat.
I know.
Right? I know. One time we're going to have to do this with cocktails.
Oh, at least once.
Sounds good. And we are moving into quite the period of astrology in the next few weeks. So where should we start?
Well, I know we were talking about doing the ingress of the year. And of course, a lot of folks refer to it as the equinox. So I thought we'd talk about those two things and then anything else that might be coming up.
That sounds excellent. Well, it's funny. Was it this year or last year when I was writing the horoscopes? My editor came back with, I kept saying Happy New Year for the March, and she said the general population don't understand that there's another new year.
Right.
And so, it took me back a little bit because I thought, well, but people should know that that's the beginning of the solar year that happens whenever the sun first moves into Aries. And whether you're here and you're having spring equinox in our hemisphere, or you're having, the fall, it's still the sun going into Aries is 0 degrees and beginning a solar cycle.
Right.
And so in terms of, starting new things, moving forward, we're in an interesting time for this particular ingress.
Yeah.
Ingress meaning a planet is going into a new sign. That because of where the eclipses are sitting. So we talked about the eclipses, last time, and there's going to be another episode about them going forward. So, eclipses being about purging, there's this kind of weird, starting stuff, but yet you're going to have to wait a little while before things really take off, right?
The chart has the sun 3 degrees separating from that Neptune. Like I almost picture it running away from the Neptune, like make it stop, but it's still
slightly hungover as it would be. Yes.
As much as you and I discuss how much people have felt the astrology of lately, the winter piece has been so interesting to me because I know we've referred to this, so I can't help but want to talk about it, but talking about Uranus and the shift in online experiences, every day I run into more people who are like calling in on a phone to a Zoom call or saying, I'm not going to FaceTime you. It's just going to be a phone call, or none of my tech is working. So I'm just going to go out and read, just enjoy myself. And that piece of it, that internalization that happens in the winter so naturally really happened this winter. People really did go inside. And then there were little flickers of these other astrological influences going on.
Nice. Well, and it's interesting because as you describe that, that loop of rulership, so it has to go through Saturn and Pisces and break down a little bit, but then it goes and it ends up with Jupiter and Taurus. And so it's like Jupiter needs to solidify what got melted, so there's this really it's a really strange story when you follow the rulership through. For sure.
But I love the Venus point, right? Like the Venus ruling the Taurus, I definitely feel that component of it.
So I wanted to, we were talking about the sun being with Neptune before it moves into Aries for the beginning of the year. And so I guess having the eclipses right after it, it's almost like the sun goes and gets really drunk with Neptune and then has to like have some downtime before it and go through the eclipses before it can actually like really shine. I like that imagery and that idea, because we do have that little dip break. Maybe it's a break that we take before we actually things
the
pick up.
influence changes the quality, right? Like it's a very big difference to be conjunct, the ruler of your ruler, versus just having the influence from your ruler. I mean, that's just super different. And then the other piece of it is, I like the trine to the moon, but the Pluto opposition's a little, even though it's out of sign, I'm a little like, well, or no, it's not out of sign.
No, it's not out of sign. Yeah. No.
Look at me.
But see,
Pluto back into Capricorn.
I guess there is that one more time that we have to do that, right?
Yeah.
No, it's the trine, I mean, the moon being in early degrees, it's going to have a conversation with everybody, while it's in Leo. And the interesting thing, I noticed that for you, where you are, the reason I ask is because when I do a chart for where I am, the city that I'm in is the capital of the province that I live in. And so I can look at it in terms of provincially also what could happen right now. Full disclosure, disclaimer, I am not a mundane astrologer and I don't claim to be, and I'm, right. So I'm definitely not taking, coming at it from that point of view. But in the chart here, the moon is in the 10th.
Right.
And it Cancer on the midheaven.
Right.
And it's, all by itself over there in Leo. And so, it's an interesting, if you think about the moon being everybody, being women, right. And then Cancer being, women's issues and things like that. I just feel like that is going to be a big part of the discussion here. And what's interesting here is that there's this big battle with daycares happening, because the Canadian government gave money to the provinces to pay so that there was subsidized daycare finally in Canada.
Yeah.
And our particular regional government doesn't like our federal government. And so anything that they do that's positive or seen as positive, they screw up so that then they can turn around and blame, right?
That never happens in America.
And this has been really toxic, and it's been like really, really detrimental here. Yeah. And so in terms of the chart and how it's interesting is that right now, the government's not giving the daycares the money. And so they can't afford to operate. And so what they're doing is they're screwing up this program so that they can make the federal government look bad.
Yeah.
And so when I see this chart and I see that it's, the moon up there at the top, that this issue is definitely going to be huge, or at least it's going to be the thing that gets all the attention. When you think about stuff that's up at the top of the chart, it's what gets all the attention.
Yeah.
Right. And so I feel like anything to do with women, children, anything like that could possibly be the smoke screen.
Well, I can only think, we're not that far away at the time of recording from the State of the Union address. And there was a rebuttal that was very emotional, very female focused, and very much about crime against women and children. And come to find out that it's not actually accurate in terms of the timing or the consequences. But to your point, there is that sense of, I sort of feel like at this point, if we're engaged in public discourse at all, it is always worth it to point to the most positive outcome, if only to orient people to something that's functioning. Because there's so much chaos going on, all across the board, the orientation I would give is that the practical and considered needs of families are being dropped, and that's going to have an outcome that's not good, and that there is required some of that, like, I'm just thinking about a super competent woman who has to kind of say, we don't have this, we don't have what we need to get by, so we're going to have to make a change. Or I'll make it more clear. In my past, even though in the United States, the courts have been set up to benefit men, especially if they have families, my personal experience has been it's the women who attend to the needs of families, and that there are certainly exceptions, and certainly all humans are capable of that practice, but that it's often pitted as a female issue. And so there's I would say, I would hope that there would be more strength, but I can see what you're saying about the smokescreen.
Well, and it's kind of funny. We have been revisiting the old sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati. Oh. Right. And I'm surprised at how relevant, and how when you revisit things back then, how inappropriate.
Yeah.
In terms of, race, gender, all of that.
Yeah.
This is still not great, but it's definitely much better than most of the things at the time. It's kind of shocking.
It's as if all that could be presented was the completely inappropriate behavior, and the reflection on that behavior would have to come later. And so we're just tumbling along.
Yeah. But the episode that we watched yesterday was when Johnny Fever tells his listeners, and he thinks there's only one. He's convinced nobody's listening to him, because it's the middle of the, very, very early morning.
Yeah.
And he tells them there's a garbage strike. So they should just take all their trash and dump it at City Hall to, so that they're heard. Yeah. And people do it, and they get into all this trouble. And it's funny because I had this thought not that long ago when I started hearing about this daycare issue here. It's like, well, why didn't everybody just drop your kids off at the legislature? And, and
that's a good idea.
It was just like this, literally, we watched this episode like a week after I had that thought. So then when I see this chart, I actually think maybe people should actually dump their kids off at the legislature.
Not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea. Well, and that speaks to the creativity too, but it's that like super practical sensibility of like, we're going to get through this. How will it look?
Yeah. I don't know. It's funny how life and art, the reflection of life and art like that is it made me laugh harder than it normally would have. It's already funny, but the timing was just so great.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. And before I forget, so because we talked about eclipses last time.
Yeah.
And I was talking about how like the color of the nodes is black, and we had this whole conversation about remediation for the nodes. So right now we have Venus in Pisces, which is a place that Venus loves to be. And so I've been looking at different charts of people who have that in their chart natally.
Oh, nice.
And I did a whole series on Venus and Aquarius. So I'm going to do another one with Venus and Pisces. And so one of the people that came up was Christian Dior has Venus and Pisces, and it's conjunct his south node.
Oh,
and so listen to this quote. Black is the most slimming of all colors. It is the most flattering. You can wear black at any time. You can wear it at any age. You can wear it for almost any occasion. I could write a book about black. I just couldn't stop laughing. Because it's like, one of those moments where the chart just talks out loud in such an obvious way, right?
Yeah.
And so I just thought that was just, it made me giggle, considering it was just a topic that we were just talking about. It was kind of perfect.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect his Venus to literally say it out loud.
Right, exactly.
Black's the
just,
color. Black south node. South node black, black.
Funny.
Black.
Yeah.
Fun.
It made me laugh. So back to this chart and the Venus. Yeah. So we have Venus applying to Saturn in this chart. Right. So that was another kind of peace to, you know, legislation and women, and, you know,
Right.
because Venus represents women and Saturn
That's
is the
right.
rules, right?
Yep.
So that definitely is going to be highlighted for this year. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm starting to think we should put a chart up.
Sure,
Do you want to go
I
ahead
can
and
do
put
that. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it?
I can. Very
Yay.
cool.
I'm gonna just I don't know why that has to be there. There we go. Yeah, so this is what it looks like from here anyways.
Right.
When I did it in the other side of the United States on the East Coast, the moon
Yeah.
was in the ninth house over here.
Yeah.
So it actually
That's
wasn't
cool.
shifted all that much, right? It was just kind of moved, everything moved
Yeah.
clockwise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But what was interesting to me here specifically is the nodal
Yeah.
axis is right on the ascendant descendant line.
Hmm.
So and because so this is Libra, this is ruled by Venus, which, you know, speaks to all the things that I just mentioned. And
Right.
so I feel like in this part of the world anyways, for sure, that these issues are going to be just suck the life out of people. Like I just feel like there's just going to be such a drain on people's energy and their
Hmm.
capacity to even engage in what is going on when it comes to all these women's issues and things like that.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah, anyways, I just wanted to speak to
Well,
that.
yeah, and so let's touch into this just a hair more in that simpler way of, so you looked at the Libra ascendant that's on
Yep,
this chart for Edmonton, and then you looked at the rulership of Venus, and the
yep,
condition of Venus is that it's applying to Saturn. And we
yep.
know that as exalted as Venus is, it will just mildly warm up that Saturn versus the Saturn not having an impact on the Venus. So there will be barrenness, coolness, overwhelm, confusion possibly with that Saturn in Pisces, aloneness, feelings of aloneness,
Isolation, yeah.
yeah, isolation, yeah, with folks who are particularly affected by it, but we're talking about the year. And so that condition, so ascendant to the ruler, and then a transit that's coming up. I love that. And what do you think about that Aries in the seventh? I mean, if you wanted to say flopping around trying to figure out relationships, there's so much that's unanticipated right now in with regard to um, uh, how we make agreements with each other and how we partner with each other. I think that Aries with the Mercury conjunct the Chiron is telling a tale for sure with this particular chart.
Yeah, well, and so in this particular chart in this area, there's a huge we're having huge issues with the changes they're making to the medical field. And this
Mm,
part of the chart isn't just personal partnerships, it's also our professional relationships. It holds all of our professionals, our doctors, our lawyers, and, you know, all of those types of people are
right.
ruled in this house. And so there's a lot of energy, and you have Chiron, and, you know,
Yeah.
Mercury is about to join, so there's something to do with the healing professions, and um a lot of energy, especially when we talk about the eclipses in that area of this chart. And, you know, wherever that Aries energy is going to play out for people, where it ends up in their chart, there's
Hmm.
something to do with healing, how we talk about healing,
Right.
all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, we're
Is
kind of
highlighted.
renegotiating everything. Yeah.
For sure.
Interesting.
And we have a bunch of pair ups too, which is kind of funny when we see that. So, you know, Mercury is with Chiron, Jupiter is about to join Uranus, Venus is with Saturn, the sun is still pretty close to Neptune. So it's like we've got these little pairings that either have just happened or are going to happen shortly after the sun has changed signs, right?
Right.
And so it tends to, I don't know about you, but I find when you have like a slower planet and a faster planet join, it tends to really amp up the energy in some
That's
way.
my
Of the
experience.
slower one tends to amp up the faster one, I find, right?
Well, the slower one to me always has the heavier impact. But, for something like Saturn, Venus coming by warms it up, is how I think about it. So,
Yeah.
so a different way of influencing, right? The slower planet in my mind is the authority, and then the faster planet is a different kind of influence.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that it does do is when you're talking about rulerships of houses, you have more houses involved because you have
Right.
two planets that have joined up. And so now we have more areas of life highlighted. So
Yes.
maybe that's why for me, that seems like it becomes bigger,
Yeah,
because
that makes sense.
yeah. And I hadn't
Yeah.
actually put those two things together, but yeah, I think that might be why in my head, it seems like more is going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, if we're skewing this to the year, we have an election year here in the States.
that's
And
right.
yeah, and so it's interesting to me, all of these different elements. And of course, women's rights are top of mind for us. And when I look at this for the year, the CDC just came out with some insane advice for COVID that if you don't have a temperature overnight, you should go back to work, which is just such an abdication of their duty that people are talking about suing them because they are required to look after public health and they're clearly not doing it. So both of those things I see the war. We've talked about that quite a bit. um, Creative solutions. I know this chart changes with every location. We just described that. So in New York, I think the Jupiter and Uranus straddle the seventh instead of that south node from New York. And
Right.
that's another sense of that vibe. And what I was trying to highlight with all of that is the seventh, like you're saying, it's not just personal relationships, it's relationships with a legal entanglement, I would say. So it's marriage license, it's your birth certificate that has your parents listed on it. It's those type of relationships on a personal level, and then like you're saying, partnerships and the health professions and all of the other things. So I see that deep unsettling vibe of families that's only just now getting talked about after years of, in the States at least, intense discourse around politics and personal safety and personal health.
Right. Right. Well, and the other thing too is that, you have Mars is going to change signs fairly quickly after
Yeah.
this. And so there's no air,
Right.
other than Mars. So there's things are going to be passionate, things are going to be emotional, things might seem irrational. Is my take when you don't have a lot of air happening in the chart. The other thing that I noticed here was that um I remembered it and then it left my brain. Oh, the difference between where you are and where I am. That was the other
Yeah.
thing that I noticed. This has a cardinal cross for the axis. So if
That's right.
anybody's asking me, so these points here form the cross that kind of anchor the chart. And these
Yes.
are all the cardinal signs. So generally that means a lot of activity and change and, not a lot of standing still. Whereas in the East Coast chart, it was a fixed cross.
That's right.
So I thought that was really interesting because, as you pointed out, this is an election year.
Yeah.
And when we see a fixed cross like that, usually that means not a lot of change.
Right.
And so that'll be interesting to see if that holds true in terms of what happens during your election.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting stuff, and I don't mean to uh, narrow it down to just a discussion about the US by any means, but I'll add this last tidbit that there's a lot of folks who are voting undecided, even if they're aligned with the current administration, as like a means to like get different legislation passed. And so to me, it's a little shocking, the choices that people are making, but it speaks again to that more feminine approach of, here's something that you're going to have to face the consequences of that you can't control. And here's a way of communicating it that really kind of brings the pain. So I wonder if that's not another way to interpret that North Node sort of pile up.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we're
Okay.
really getting the message. Yeah.
All right. Are we done with looking
I
at the
think so.
chart, do you
I
think?
think
Okay.
so.
Back to us. Yeah.
Hey, there you are.
Yeah. So those are sort of the three, like, when I look at something like this, I want to know what relationship the sun and the moon are making. So we've got
Yes.
it's waxing. So
Yep.
that generally means more activity, things progressing, things growing, right? Maybe seeing some newer things when that happens. The modalities, we've got a pretty good spread really
Right.
between cardinal, fixed, and
Yeah.
mutable, so that's okay. Yeah, and then also, like I pointed out the cross, and then the aspects that the planets are making. So this is so I was just teaching the shapes of the chart, right? The chart shapes.
Love that.
And this is actually a pretty solid bowl shape.
Absolutely. With Pluto
Yes.
leading.
Yeah. Pluto leading, and then the moon at the end. Like, come on.
Right.
So we're leading with, revolution, and ending with, no, I'm just going to do whatever makes me feel comfortable and safe.
Right.
So I feel like there's going to be this huge buildup that leads to pretty much very nothing.
Yeah.
All for show, moon and Leo.
So interesting. So interesting. So yeah. I get all of that. Smokescreen. That's what I was trying to pull out of the air.
Right? Like it just
vibe.
really feels like a lot of nothing.
Yeah. Fascinating.
I do also feel strongly that we will all energetically benefit from doing a good purge this eclipse season. I really feel like on a personal level, each of us doing that, whatever that cleaning out that needs to get done, will be really, there's just something about it this year that feels important. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe that's just me.
And I know we said this before during the eclipse, but that wouldn't happen on the eclipse, right? That would be kind of a prep. Like, consider the eclipse as a guest coming to your house. By the time that guest gets there, everything should be in place, and you should just observe the guest and let them go. You shouldn't be saddling them with stuff. And we talked about that with the sense of we can't control that energy, so we're not trying to build anything there.
No, just trying to clear the way,
Absolutely.
get rid of the stuff that's not working anymore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my favorite one is just to do a good old shower scrub purification. Yeah. I know that I've mentioned before on Sphere and Sundry, she has a whole ritual that all involves a purification and a bath and all that kind of stuff, right? Just to sort of wash that old crap away.
It's so lovely. So that's Caitlin Kopic.
Yeah. At
sphereandsundry.com. Yeah.
And so just the using the salts and the clearing and the whatever you need to do. I love some of the sound combinations are particularly good for clearing energy. So I'll often go through and either use smoke or whatever, but then I'll do a final pass with just using the sound frequencies if I'm clearing myself or a space, and that can be pretty great. But we're in such a weird collective vibe at the moment that clearing some of that up would be helpful, I think.
It's a little bit of high anxiety. A few of my favorite ways to clear, some of them are to, you can get an incense you like, or a potpourri, or there are mixes that you can kind of dump on the floor and then leave them overnight and then sweep it up the next day. Nice. I love bells or different sounds. I'm not acutonics focused, but the chimes I have are legit. And there's really something fascinating about how that clears space. I've done a lot of I enjoy clapping into corners until the
Nice.
sound changes.
I have a rattle that I love for breaking
Nice.
up spot that works really great. And the other thing that's really nice in terms of sound for clearing up and moving energy is the tinctures are
Yeah.
really, I really like my tinctures for that. So
And those are the symbols, right? On the leather band. So
yeah.
beautiful.
Can you see them?
Yeah.
There's just lots of different ways to clear energy and to move energy. So
Open your
whatever.
windows if you can. Yeah. Yeah. Fresh air is good. Cleaning's good.
Absolutely. Yes, sunlight, if you have it, is great.
Yep.
So is there anything else that you think we should talk about with this chart?
Not with the chart, but there's so much about this time that people might understand more through the equinox. This vibe of coming out of winter, had its own suite of stories, being almost a return to life. And, with so many people affected by the weather, negatively affected, not able to kind of stay in life. This is a burgeoning time. This is a beautiful time to kind of embrace that. And it's a complement in the fall. And so to me, it gets back to the kind of images that we've been talking about with the eclipse and with that no electricity living on the land. This became something that people could see. And then, of course, we can't mention it without mentioning the precession of the year, that it used to be 0 Aries that the sun would come to at the point of spring. But now I think it's Taurus. I don't think it's going back to Aries until 2300, until quite a while. And of course, that precession is the difference between sidereal and tropical astrology. So
Right.
there's so many places that we enter into this period of time of the year that we don't maybe think about. And then, of course, it is when the Druids were building the facility to see that sun come in on that day, they were worshiping a goddess named Easter. And so there's a current way that we celebrate this with eggs and bunnies and so on that mimics that. But yeah, that was all I wanted to add about this time of year.
Yes. And it is from the astrological point of view, it is we move into the sun's time of exaltation.
Yes.
It does feel very special in the sign of
Yes.
Aries.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, I would argue that Aries has the most motion of all of the
Yes.
signs, forward motion, because
Yeah.
it's Mars straight ahead. And so I think that, energetically, when we talk about it's, the equinox in the beginning in that sense,
Yeah.
it's cool when you think about the energy of Aries, and then you think
Right.
about all the celebrations that kick up the excitement that it's
Yes.
spring, and
Yeah.
that to me, that when I think about those things, that's what gives me sort of the most positive sense of that Aries energy is,
Yeah.
that excitement and planning to move forward, and that getting ready for jumping out of the gates,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know what how they would interpret how this is all happening with the equinox first and then the eclipses right after, because in ancient times that would have not been seen as great.
I know. I was just thinking that when you were talking about it, here we are coming into kind of it is a wide open season, right? It's get your energy out, full forward, and then be aware that some of it will be lost.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
a
Or
fun
that there might be
message.
too much of it, right? Because on the other side, we're
That's
going to
right.
have an eclipse that might bring in too much energy. So
That's
yeah,
right.
it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in terms of, um, collectively how this plays out, and then hearing people's stories of how it's happening personally.
Yeah.
I personally am excited that we're going to move into spring soon. I am done with winter.
I'm a huge fan of spring. It always feels very civil, even in these other locations.
Well, and here's the other thing to keep in mind with this particular time that we're in at the moment, and that will continue through this ingress, is that everything is still direct. We do not have planets retrograde yet,
One more
because
month.
Mercury doesn't go
couple more
retrograde until April 1st.
Right.
And so, that in itself speaks to that really high energy moving forwards vibe that this chart has, right?
Yeah.
And so instead of that feeling passing once things start going retrograde, we actually have it set in the ingress chart that things are moving forward. So that'll be interesting too, because I think, like, from talking with clients and talking with the membership folks, people are a bit overstimulated right now, I think is kind of the best way to put it, with everything moving direct.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of sad actually to see it in the ingress chart, to be reminded of it. Cause I'm like, oh, so we're still going to have that feeling that, that we have to remind ourselves to stop and breathe. And I think what it means is we are going to have to take the opportunities to rest, because there won't be natural breaks.
I love that. I love that though. I mean, I don't love that there aren't natural breaks, but I love that we can get ahead of it and say, if you're a person who's inclined to hustle and pound, this year you're going to get so much of that you should look into a few breaks. I love that we can offer that. Yeah.
And then with that moon being the last planet in the bull, or, where it is in this, in the chart, being the most elevated planet in both of the charts for us anyways.
That's right.
The final word is self-care. The final word is how can you nourish yourself and how can you take care of yourself? And so I feel like that's the period on the end of the sentence, so to speak.
That's beautiful.
Okay, doke. I'm going to drink coffee.
That's great. I'll be right back. I love that note about I can't remember what we were talking about. That was fun.
That's okay. We were just talking about the moon being the period at the end of the sentence. Yeah, so the themes are: take care of yourself, take breaks, get rid of shit you don't need.
Yes. Don't be surprised if things that you conjure up don't immediately spring into life. Don't be surprised if they do immediately spring into life. There's a magical quality in the air too.
Yes. And make sure to breathe, because without the air happening in the chart, I find that we forget to breathe. And if you are somebody who has a lot of air in your chart, when we have these moments of lack, it can be a little bit, emotions can get overwhelming because we don't have that air to rely on to go into our heads. And so, people like me who don't have a lot of water, these times I have to remember to breathe and to honor the emotions, not be freaked out by them. But yeah, I noticed the lack of air in this chart, and we keep like losing an element every time all the faster things move over. And so at this particular time, we're going to lack air. So everybody remember to breathe, take breaks. Yeah.
At least it's a little less water. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, overall, there's a nice dispersion through the other three elements for sure. So that's a pretty good thing. So anyways, happy equinox